Magic's creatures are incredible. If you're designing a card game and you cannot, at the very least, make something as, if not more, interesting than just the interplay of vanilla magic creatures and the mana curve system, not even the mana color system, then get off of store shelves. Hi, I'm Michael from Michael the Gathering. This is Card of the Day. Today, we're talking about Leeching Licid, brought to us by a comment from I Am Sushi, who asks what we all want to know. Why are Licids like that? If you'd like to propose a card for me to talk about, please be more specific than that. Leave a common or uncommon comment down below, and if you'd like to skip to the front of the line or request something above uncommon, leave a little financial incentive. Now, I Am Sushi's question of why are Licids like that is broad and also oddly specific in a bunch of different ways. For those of you unaware, Licids are a series of cycles of creatures that are a weird, horrifying leech monster that are all generally some form of a creature that comes onto the battlefield and then has a summoning sickness gated tap ability to turn itself from a creature into an enchant creature, or an aura with enchant creature nowadays, that then has some sort of alternate effect. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. My personal favorite is Leeching Licid because the art looks like this. It's very simple to explain how the card works when the card looks like that. That is an underrated aspect of many cards, and the ability flying. There are a bunch of weird technical things that you can do with Licids, not least of which the fact that they were printed in a time where damage on the stack was a thing, I think. They definitely existed in a time when damage on the stack was a thing. But the broader concept of them is something that WotC have explored many, many different times, because creatures are not only the best part of Magic, they are also fundamentally a beautiful canvas on which we can paint all sorts of incredible things, but all of the best artists mess with the canvas. Starting at the incredibly simple end of the interpretation of why are Licids like that, the idea of a creature that attaches itself onto another creature and gains some sort of benefit or gives some sort of benefit is relatively straightforward if you think about it from just a raw creative perspective. Like, if you're thinking of fantasy tropes, for instance, you're going to end up on Leech that either takes over someone's brain or just parasitizes them in some way, because those are things that exist in real life. They're just not this big. And designers are naturally going to be drawn to these kinds of effects because they naturally allow you to explore weird, niche, mechanical and design ideas that players are going to have an easier time understanding, because you can sort of point at the ideas that we already understand of real-life parasites. Every word saved in the explanation of a card's effect is a different word that you can add, or at the very least, flavor that you can add to make the game flow better. And a game that flows well is a good game. You might think that the first cards that I'm going to draw a comparison to with Licids are Bestow cards, and momentarily, I do just have to mention that WotC also just made a bunch of stuff that turned into other stuff in early Magic that was incredibly wild. Tackle Maggot is not a creature. Instead, this horrifying parasite is purely an aura, which goes onto an opposing creature, makes that creature's controller lose life, and then infects a different creature unless there are no creatures left on the battlefield, in which case it stays on the battlefield, but still as an enchantment, just not an aura. If we did that again today, we would just have it become a 1/1, I guess, or do any number of other things. I always think that it is wild the way that if you go far enough back in games, not only do you get incredibly overly simple cards like 5-mana legendary vanilla creatures, you also get cards that are just ludicrously complicated. Nobody is ever going to play Tackle Maggot correctly every single time. Yes, that is a challenge. Like and subscribe. But yes, we do have to make the obvious comparison of Licids, creatures that turn themselves into auras, to Bestow creatures, which are technically speaking auras that turn themselves into creatures. It's just that it's infinitely easier to format them within the Magic rules as creature cards in your hand that can be cast for an alternate way that transforms them. Because one of the important parts of casting an aura is the part where it's a targeted spell. This is an aspect that you're going to find a lot in these creatures that turn themselves into auras in some way, or just in general attach themselves to other creatures, is that there's often going to be a moment of leaving the battlefield in some way, or they get cast as the mode that targets in some way, and then at a later point, they can fall off and become a creature and it's whatever. Because as soon as you put targeting into a card's effects, there's a natural requirement of sometimes the effects are going to fizzle, they're going to need to have actual timing restrictions, or at least they're going to need to work within the timing system of Magic. They're going to play incredibly differently if the effect or the spell can be used at instant or sorcery speed. It is a huge mess. That's why you can start with an incredibly simple concept like Hopeful Eidolon, a 1-mana 1/1 lifelinker that gives its abilities to a creature it bestows, and end up with this much text on it. But I also attribute a lot of that to Magic moving away from the early installment wild complexity and wanting to avoid words like gains all of this creature's abilities except this one. Which of course we would come back to with nonsense like mutate. The natural next step from Bestow creatures is reconfigure equipments from Kamigawa and Newgrounds, which were obviously much simpler to implement because equipment don't have to come onto the battlefield fundamentally attached to anything, which meant that it was much simpler for you to just play the card and have people be like, okay, cool, it comes down and it's on the battlefield as a creature first, and then later you can turn it into an equipment. That also made the whole process of moving them around much more straightforward, because equip is also already sorcery speed, because we don't live in that nightmare dimension. If we were doing modern Licids, they would look something like this. Although realistically, we would need some sort of bespoke situation where we can put them on our opponent's creatures, because almost all of the Licids are cards that you would want to put on your opponent's stuff. The way that we have historically done that sort of effect has been double-faced cards, which is probably the best way to do it, with the admitted problem that WotC physically cannot do double-faced cards in every single set, at least not at a large density like you would get in an Innistrad block. Probably, flavor-wise, one of my favorite cards ever printed is Vengeful Strangler, a 2-mana 2/1 that depicts a man getting what he deserves, and then coming back as a haunted pair of hands that are only a problem if my opponent refuses to sacrifice the creature, which obviously is the cause of everything wrong that happened to my beautiful murderer. Yes, most of my appreciation for this card is for the backside of this card. No, I will not be taking comments for the phrasing of that sentence. And a large part of that is I just really, really love auras that say, at the beginning of Enchanted Creatures Controller's upkeep, that player sacrifices a creature, because they could end their suffering whenever they want, and they choose not to. Never let me tell you that I am a nice and kind and benevolent person. I am a sadist. But rather than all of these matters, all of these mechanical connections and flavor connections, possibly the only real answer that we can give to why are Licids like that is the fact that they were printed in Tempest. And I've danced around it a little bit in a lot of videos, to be honest. While Alpha might be the actual first set that's ever been printed, Tempest is the real alpha for a lot of modern Magic. For those of you who don't know, the primary reason is because it's the first set where Mark Rosewater was in charge. And while I say in charge, he has never been fully in charge of WotC and even WotC card design. He has always had a boss who can veto the things that he designs. It's just, that's how people view him. But he was the set lead on Tempest, and he has gone on record many times that when he was given the set lead of Tempest, he almost immediately turned in a file that had too much. Just everything was way too much. They were putting stuff into future sets from the Tempest design file for ages. I think literally years. And when you look at the rest of Tempest, Licids make a lot of sense. There were a lot of things in Tempest that were Mark Rosewater and the people around him just doing stuff that makes sense as a fantasy trope to get to. So Leeching Licid was a no-brainer to include in Magic, and for some reason it got a cycle of cards. But similarly to that, we also got Ruby Medallion, the card that is now a modern mainstay after its MH3 reprinting, as well as effects like Humility, an enchantment that removes all abilities from creatures and makes them 1/1s, and keeps prospective Magic judges awake at night. We've had cheap conditional reanimations. Well, now let's print Reanimate, the cheapest possible reanimation with a theoretically fair drawback. We've printed every other possible incredibly broken land, except we missed the one that taps for 2 but it damages you every time. Let's print Ancient Tomb. And you know what other Magic classic needs a rarity and power downshift homage? Black Lotus! Talking about Tempest was a little bit unavoidable today, because that really is a big part of why Licids are like that. But I avoid it whenever I can, because Marrow gets so much undeserved hate when he is very openly surrounded by people who are just as much sickos as he is on his worst day.